In today's video, I'll be breaking down what I consider coaster credits. Hello coaster lovers, so if you're a normal day coaster enthusiast or if you are becoming one, there's this hobby that we enthusiasts do, is to keep track of how many roller coasters we have ridden, and it's known as coaster credits. As for me, I have 53 coaster credits for right now, but there are so many coasters out there that are really hard to classify as a new credit or not a credit. But if you still don't get how coaster credits work, say you go to a park and they have 6 coasters there, and if you ride all 6, that means you got 6 coaster credits. Then you go to another park and they have 9 credits. Then you ride all the coasters, and at the end, you have 15 coaster credits. It's a fun way to keep track of all the coasters you have ridden. And before we start, it is impossible to define coaster credits as objective. Everyone has their own opinion on it. So I say let's hop in by discussing are relocations new coaster credits. So I'm going to give an example. So is Chimera at La Feria in Mexico a different credit from All-American Trip Loop at Indiana Beach? It's the same ride, but the restraints and ride experience are completely different from each other. Chimera ran at 2x speed, but All-American Trip Loop does not run as fast as Chimera, but it does have the same layout. But I'd say they are 2 different coaster credits. I know it's the same ride, but it matters about the ride experience. But other parks have a coaster, and it has a clone somewhere else. So if you ride both, are those 2 different credits? I'm going to be using 2 SLCs for this, which are Mind Eraser at Elitch Gardens and Mind Eraser at Six Flags Darien Lake. It's the same layout, but the placement of one another is different. On the top of Mind Eraser at Elitch, you see the park in downtown Denver, but on Darien Lakes, you see a lake. So this one is also completely biased, but I don't know, it gives me a headache. But if I had to narrow it down if it's a new credit or not, I'd say it is. It's a 51 and 49% dilemma. But if you ride an SLC with the additional helix like Blue Tornado at Garland or Napuco at Lost Island, then yes, it is a new credit. This also applies to other clones as well, like Batwing at Six Flags America and Naihaka Carowinds. The next thing we'll be discussing is water coasters. Specifically, I'm highlighting 3 water rides: Atlantica Super Splash at Europa Park, Super Splash at Plopsaland Japan, and Big Timber Log Ride at Enchanted Forest. I also forgot to mention this, but I use best classification for this type of scenario. So most of Atlantica Super Splash is a water ride, but it has some roller coaster moments, such as the backwards dip, the drop, and the speed hill, but the rest of the ride experience is a water ride. But I say it is a credit. There's enough coaster aspects to it. But what about Super Splash at Plopsaland? For this, I'm going to say no. There isn't enough coaster elements that I define it as a coaster credit. But as for Big Timber Log Ride, it's a massive debate. But I personally say it's not a credit. Even though it has a gravity powered moment, it's mostly a log flume, so I don't count it. Up next we have mountain coasters or alpine coasters. You could find these types of rides at random places all across the world. But here's the thing with mountain coasters. You control the speed, and it is controlled by gravity. It's like a powered coaster, but you control it yourself. And it does have track, and it has wheels, and it has a train, and actually multiple trains, and a layout. So I'd say yes, mountain coasters are credits, but I see why other people don't count them as credits. And speaking of powered coasters, that's up next. The main thing about coasters is that they're controlled by gravity, but this type of ride is controlled by motors at the end of the train which powers it through the course. This one also gives me a headache. It's also a 51% and 49% dilemma, but I'm going to say yes, powered coasters can be added to people's credit lists. I feel like there's enough coaster aspects to it that it's a coaster. But next up on what to discuss is retracking. Say you rode Thunderhead a few years back and it was rough, but you came back to Dollywood a few years later and it's running like a dream. Is that your credit? It is not. You're riding the same ride, but when it comes to this kind of retracking, let's say Son of Beast. In 2006, I think, they removed the loop. So is that a different ride experience from old Son of Beast versus the new one? I'd say yes, it's a different ride. It's 2 wooden coasters and one of them goes upside down and one doesn't. But I feel like removing the loop is a big difference between the 2. But when it comes to something like the Great Nor'easter and Maury's Piers, they took out most of the old track and put a new track and it runs differently before the retrack. But for me, it's a new credit. It's the same layout, but it does feel different. So that's why I think Old Nor'easter and New Nor'easter are 2 separate credits. But one type of coaster that sparks a lot of debate are racing coasters. I want to highlight specifically the racer at Kings Island, and I do count both sides of the racer as 2 separate credits. They are mirrored from each other, but I say they are 2 separate credits. It feels different from one another, but I see why other people don't count it as 2. And if you don't think the racer is 2 separate credits, are Railblazer and Wonder Woman at Fiesta 2 separate credits? Think about that for a moment. But when it comes to Gemini, it's 2 separate layouts, and the helixes go opposite directions, but each side is very similar. But I say yes, Gemini is 2 separate credits. Another category of coaster credits that also sparks a massive debate are stand-up coasters versus floorless coasters. Let's consider Mantis, aka Rougarou. Nearly a decade ago, Mantis changed trains from stand-up trains to sit-down trains. So are Mantis and Rougarou two separate credits? This is a toughie, but I say they are two separate credits. It is a completely different ride experience from Mantis. Even though it's the same track and layout, it feels different from each other. So at the end of the day, it's entirely up to you to decide what makes up coaster credits. Like I said in the beginning of the video, it's impossible to make coaster credits objective, and everyone has their own opinion on them. So I want to hear from you guys. How would you share on how you define coaster credits? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel too. You can expect a new video coming out in the next 5 days. So make sure to keep that adrenaline pumping, and thanks for watching.